Alright guys, I'm going to try to see whether I can try to elucidate some of the Aeneid here for you. The first 11 lines here are all introductory. Virgil is going to lay out exactly what it is that he wants to do with his poem. All of these epic poems in antiquity would typically start with some sort of proemium like this, where the poet will announce his theme and give you some background information to it, some of which is already assumed. The entire section here is laden with references both to Roman history and to Homer, and so I'll try to make those clear. If you look here at the first line, you start with Arma virumque cano. These are actually very famous lines, and that's not just now in the Latin classroom, but even in antiquity, you see here some facsimile representations of some graffiti. These are actually contained within the corpus of Latin inscriptions. And here you have Arma virumque cano Troiae, and then the rest is cut off. Here, the handwriting is a little bit difficult to read, but you have Arma virumque cano Troiae qui, and I can sort of make out the primus right there, and then oris as well. Clearly, handwriting standards have never been exceptionally high at any point in human history. In any event, on the more literate side, Ovid, who effectively was a generation after Virgil, starts his Amores with Arma gravi numero violentaque bella paraba madre, blah, blah, blah. This is, again, a clear allusion to Virgil. So the poem, the Aeneid, immediately had popularity and has just continued throughout the ages. In any event, you have two accusatives here, I sing, arms, and the man. These two accusatives are actually direct references to Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. If you look at the first lines of both of those poems, I know you guys don't read Greek, but I'll lay this out for you. In the Iliad, the first line is Menin aedetheia peleiadeo Achilleos. Now here, Menin, the first word, this is an accusative in Greek, and it means anger or wrath, right? And it's the rage here, or the anger of Achilles. And he asks the goddess to sing the rage of Achilles. In the Odyssey, the poem begins with Andra moi ene pemusa poliutropon, etc., etc. Here, Andra in Greek means man, so there you can see the clear allusion in Virum in the Aeneid. And then again, he asks the muse to sing the man, blah, 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 who, etc., etc. Okay, so Virgil starts off clearly acknowledging his debt to the Iliad and the Odyssey. It also serves to note that in antiquity, poems did not typically have title pages, and so a poem would be known by its first line. So here, the Aeneid, some people may have, of course, referred to it as the Aeneid, following Virgil's lead, but a lot of times they'd be cataloged based on their first lines. So you have to make them memorable. Anyway, so I sing arms and the man. Now, the first spot you might run into trouble grammatically here is with Troiae, because if you read all the way through, you would realize that it looks like it's standing alone, but it actually belongs within the relative clause begun by qui. Usually in prose that's really clear, you'd have Troiae after oris. So, Arma virumque cano, I sing arms and the man, qui, now notice your qui is modifying virum, right? So in your translation, you'd want, I sing arms and the man who, primus, modifying qui, first, and then you're going to need to go all the way down to venit before you get to your verb, who first came, ab oris Troiae, from the shores of Troy. And then notice right here that Italiam has no preposition. This is typical of poetry, to omit a preposition. The accusative itself typically will convey a sense of motion toward. So Italiam there will simply be understood as to Italy. And then right here, fato profugus is a clause modifying the virum, and then of course the qui right here. So you have fato profugus, an exile or a someone who flees, fato, by fate. Keep this part in mind because typically throughout the poem you'll see that Aeneas will use his divine mission or the fate that's involved here to either as a pretext or a legitimate reason for doing the things he does. Okay, so who first came to Italy from the shores of Troy? Laviniaque, and then of course when it still goes with this, Laviniaque venit litora, right? So, and came to the Lavinian shores. Right here, the position of litora is actually a poetic technique known as enjambment. Notice that litora goes with everything that precedes here in the second line and is not connected to any of the elements in the third line, either grammatically or in sense. Right? So here, you notice you have Italiam fato profugus la vigna quae venit litora multi leteris jactatus et alto. Right? So it really stresses litora there. You will find later on there are more examples of this. It's a common poetic technique, and it serves to call attention to the noun itself. All right. So multum here is going to be used as an adverb, right? Even though it looks like it's just a neuter singular, and it's going to be modifying jactatus. So jactatus, perfect passive participle, having been tossed about multum, right? And of course ille, multum jactatus et terris, both on lands et alto and on the deep. Altus in Latin simply indicates vertical extent. This can be either height or depth. So don't be confused by our notion of altitude. That only captures one aspect of what the Romans thought of when they would talk about altus. Here, alto is used by metonymy for the sea. Notice that the metonymy is when you use a characteristic or a trait of some particular thing, and by mentioning that trait, describe the entire thing. So here, the deep. The sea is a deep thing, and so by simply referring to the deep, you are using metonymy to refer to the sea itself. All right, so tossed about on lands and on the sea, or on the deep, vi superum. Here, we comes from vis, V-I-S, which means strength or violence. It's sort of an odd noun. Look carefully, if you can, at a grammar chart showing the declension of it. It's a little bit irregular. In some accounts, when Caesar was being murdered, he exclaimed, "Haec est vis," this is violence. But it can also mean strength. Think of our use of vim and vigor. All right, so by the violence or the violent force, superum. Watch out with this particular word. This is actually a genitive plural, but in poetry, where you would expect to see superorum, you instead simply have superum. Right? What will happen is the OR will drop out to condense some of these words and make them more metrically viable. All right, so watch out. We'll have another one of those in a minute. All right, so by the violent force of the gods, it's literally the ones above. Saiwai memorem eunonis ob iram. Notice you have ob iram at the very end. Ob, much like propter, means on account of or because of with the accusative. So because of the iram, and not just any iram, the memorem iram, the remembering anger, Saiwai eunonis, of savage Juno. Notice here that you have what's known as syncasis or interlocked word order, because memorem modifies iram, whereas Saiwai modifies eunonis, and so the adjective and noun are interlocked. Right? Also notice that memorem iram, the remembering anger. Memorem here is a transferred epithet or transferred adjective. Really, it's not that the anger was remembering, Juno was remembering. But here, poetic technique, the remembering anger of Juno. Okay. Here, multa, unlike multa actually will be used substantively as a neuter plural. So, and having passus suffered multa, many things, et bello, in war, dum condret urbem inferetque Deos latio. This right here might give you some trouble combined with the subjunctive. Dum with these imperfect subjunctives has something of the force of until or up until the point when, especially when used with verbs of striving or in order to create some sort of suspense here. So the idea here is not simply while he was founding a city, but until he could found the city, until he could successfully complete it. So notice all of this suffering happened until the point at which he could found the city and inferetque, bring in the gods latio. To latium, genus unde latinum. Unde here is referring back to Latio, which is a region in Italy. I'll show you in a second. From whence, i.e., from Latium, genus Latinum, from whence came the genus Latinum, the Latin race. So I will show you right here. You'll note that following the destruction of Troy, Aeneas made his way northward to Thrace, wasn't working out there, and so he made his way south to Delos. He and his men receive a prophecy on Delos. They arrive at Crete thinking that Crete is the promised land that they had heard about in Delos. They try living there for a year. They're afflicted by plague, blah, blah, blah. They get another prophecy. They scooch on out of there. They do some sightseeing along the way. They arrive at Buthrotum, where they meet some old Trojan companions of theirs. There's another prophecy section here. They scooch on down to Sicily. They end up encountering the Cyclops in this area. Eventually, they make their way on out to Carthage, the famous Phoenician city, whose queen is Dido. This occupies 2 full books of the Aeneid. Most of it, or actually it's 3 full books, but 2 of them simply involve Aeneas recounting his journeys to Dido, and the 4th one involves the love affair that he has with her, eventually culminating in her suicide. After he breaks things off with Dido, because he receives one of these messages from Zeus, he makes his way on to Italy finally. They arrive in Cumae, where they get yet another prophecy, both from the Sibyl of Cumae and once he descends to the underworld, Aeneas' father Anchises. Finally, they get to Latium, which is the promised land. This region of Latium has a lot of cities in it which are familiar to you if you remember some of the endless wars of Rome, early Roman history. A lot of these towns come up as various places which the Romans had to subdue in their rise to greatness. But you may also remember that Alba Longa is the town which was founded by Aeneas' son Ascanius, and was then inhabited by a race of, a series of kings who were effectively names and nothing more in Roman history. Nothing's really known about them. They all have names like Aeneas Silvius, etc., until eventually you get to Numitor and Amulius, and then Romulus and Remus. Romulus, of course, going on to found Rome itself. Alba Longa still plays a very significant part in Roman history, and you have to remember that effectively the earliest settlers in Rome were simply, I don't want to say exiles, they were adventurous colonists who had left from Alba Longa. And so if you go back here and look at the patres part, you might know that this is loaded with meaning referring to patricians and senators, specifically the original men who went from Alba to Rome, ended up being what am I looking for here? The begetters of the patrician class. All right, good. So So from whence, and you don't have a verb here, but from whence is or are, or even from whence sprang the Latin race, the Alban fathers, atque, and the moenia, the walls altae Romae, of lofty Rome. Notice here, altae is a transferred adjective. Really, the moenia are the things that are lofty here, but instead you have the moenia of altae Romae, the walls of lofty Rome. Make sure, even though the temptation is there to translate the lofty walls of Rome, make sure you translate that literally as the walls of lofty Rome for the AP exam. All right, so here in this next line, Musa, this invocation to the muse, again, harkens back to Homer and the other epic poets in general. They invoke the muse because it's thought that all of these things that are contained within the epic are simply too much for one man to narrate. So he invokes her and he gives her he conjugates himself into the imperative mood here. Mihi causas memora, relate or remember to me the causas. Now, causas here introduces a series of indirect questions, okay? And remember, an indirect question is going to have a subjunctive verb. So keep that in mind right here. So first indirect question is quo numine lyso. Here you actually have an ablative absolute with what divine spirit having been injured, right? Your second of these indirect questions is quidve dolens. Or, now here you have a present active participle, and this present active participle dolens is modifying regina. So quidve dolens, or grieving what, or you could even do, or why grieving the regina, the queen, deum. Watch out here, you'd expect deorum, instead you have deum, the syncopated form of the genitive plural. Just like up here you have superum, so too here you have deum rather than superorum et deorum. Okay, so relate to me the causes. With what divine spirit having been injured, or grieving what? The queen of the gods. And then here you'd have to try to take in the full sentence before you really got the full sentence. Here you have impulere. Notice again enjambment. Impulere ends the clause, and it's placed at the very beginning of this line. Okay, so it calls attention to the word. All right, so this is from impello, impellere, and notice that this is the perfect subjunctive. Remember subjunctive, of course, because you're still in this indirect question. This is your verb for it. So tell me the causes with what divine spirit harmed or grieving what? The queen of the gods compelled the insignem pietate virum. Here's your direct object. Compelled the man famous for his piety. Make a mental note of this word. This is one of the main themes of the Aeneid, is the piety of Aeneas. So much so that there's an old anecdote, supposedly the favorite anecdote of the poet William Butler Yeats, in which a man who was reading the Aeneid for the first time was asked how he liked those stories about that warrior turned exile, and he asked, "Warrior? Why, I thought that the story was about a priest," on account of all the references to piety. Anyway, forget about that entirely. So with what, blah, 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 she compelled the man noted for his piety to adire, approach so many tot labores, so many labors, and, I forgot, up here you still had tot volvere casus, to turn about so many downfalls, so many falls, so many unfortunate events, okay? And then Virgil concludes this portion of the poem with a rhetorical question: Tantai animis caelestibus irae. Are there such great angers in animis caelestibus, celestial souls? All right. Having established that, I am now going to run over a couple of metrical points with you. I'll warn you that it's extremely hard to use the tool that I have here to mark the metrical marks on here, but I'll give it a try. So look at line 2, right? You may run into a problem here with Lawina. So if you start scanning, remember your first syllable is going to be long. Italy, fa, to, right? So notice you have a foot right there, but here this is long. Profugus is actually going to be short, profugus. Right? You got 2 consonants right there. La, right? And you've got, that's a foot right there, usla. And then here, notice this is long, la win. And then your temptation is going to be to scan la win, ya, and then you have too many syllables left right there to complete the meter correctly. But I'll show you how this is done. Here, this I is going to function as a consonant, right? So la winya, that doesn't look like a short one. La winyaque venit. Okay, so Italiam fato profugus la winyaque venit. Right? So make sure that you make a careful note about this. This confused even ancient commentators who thought that Virgil must have written la winaque and that this I was effectively a transcription error. So if that tripped you up, don't feel bad. Even native speakers had trouble with it. All right. Here with litera mult illet teris jactatus et alto. So look at this. Litura mult, and then here, don't do multum ille et teris. You're going to have way too many syllables. Right here, you've got a lot of elision. Notice this M and this initial vowel are going to elide, and then this is going to elide right here. So mult illet teris jactatus et alto, right? I lost my place in this. So litera mult illet teris jactatus et. That's supposed to be 2 shorts right there. Jactatus et alto. Litera mult illet teris jactatus et alto. Good. All right. Right here, notice this elision, multa quoque bello passus dum condret urbem, blah, blah, blah. Right here, notice albanique patres at qualtae moenia Romae. So there's an elision right there. Let me see, are there any other of these tough spots? Not that jump out at me right now, other than right here at the end. Impulerit tantainanimis kai lestibus irae. So you have long, short, short, long, long, long. So you have impulerit, ta impulerit tan tainanimis. Notice that's 2 shorts. Animis kai lestibus irae. All right. So that video went on a lot longer than I had hoped that it would. Hopefully the others will be shorter. I won't have to give you as much background information on these things, perhaps. Or perhaps you'll just be stuck watching a lot of videos. Ask me about anything in class. All right.